Ice, he thought, as he stepped his dripping feet onto the marble floor of the cathedral, his clothes soaked and heavy against his shivering skin. Sanctuary is what he thought, and he hoped to God he would find it here. The door was heavy too, almost impossible to open, and would not have been able to pull the large pieces of wood and iron away from its frame had it not been for a desperate attempt for shelter. A quivering wall of virgin air met his body in a gust, so sharp compared to the summer rains he had just left behind him. What a place was this! A tremble ran down his spine. He gasped. Before him was a room encased in stone and glass, towering over his insignificant body like a mountain of beauty. Illuminated by flickering flames, the light pulsated on the walls around him, pulling him in, entrancing him. He moved in closer, guided towards the altar ahead by the bewitching tones of the choir. Never before had he seen such magnificence, such devilish brilliance in the material world. He crept up, like an intruder, in the shadowed nooks of the church, hoping not to be seen, his feet making puddles on the hard, sacred ground. The space was so empty, he was sure to be heard if he was not careful enough. He curled up in a corner near the altar in front, panting from fear, looking around frantically for a looker-on. None, he thought to himself. Dieu merci. If he were careful, perhaps he could spend the night here and creep out early next morning. He was sure to find an opening somewhere. It was impossible for the armed men to watch the city constantly. This reassured him enough, his heart sliding from his throat back into his chest, where he placed his hand to calm himself down. It was there that he felt the hideous thing. He looked down at himself and realized in horror the yellow cloth on his chest. He hadn't thought to take it off before entering the cathedral, this yellow cross burning into his clothes. Frantically, he ripped it off, throwing the soaking heap of cloth into a pile on the ground. He clutched his chest, for his heart was heavy with fear, and realized he was gripping his skin, slippery with another's blood. The room began to spin. Pressure as heavy as stone around him began to compress his chest. It was difficult to breathe for all the air in this giant chamber, vaulted ceilings that could reach the heavens themselves. He was alone here, alone in the empty darkness of the divine. His panting began to reverberate on the walls around him, and it was then that he could see a dark, cloaked figure emerging at the other end of the nave, walking slowly towards him. Ce soir, je pense que je meurs, he groaned to himself, still clutching his heart. The figure came closer still, and a faint ringing sounded in his brain. He fought it as hard as he could. No, he thought, hold on. Then against his will, his eyes clouded and turned black, his quivering body laying hot on the cold stone floor. He awoke to the smell of incense and burning wood filling his nostrils. He noticed his body was no longer on marble but on hay, warmed by the obvious presence of a fire. This is when he opened his eyes, so afraid that he had been caught and tied to a pyre in the time he was unconscious, but he was not. Instead, he found himself in a smaller room on top of a simple mattress, his ribs wrapped in a tight cloth. Then the pain came. He must have hit something when falling onto the floor of the sanctuary. He breathed in and felt the pain searing into his sides. He let out a cry in agony. It took him a while, but eventually he noticed a cloaked monk sitting in front of the fire not 3 feet away, stirring a pot delicately, adding what looked like rosemary to a bubbling concoction. The city is on fire tonight, he spoke, his words like scratching gravel underneath a foot, coarse and weathered. The monk looked over at him with soft eyes. Can you hear it burning, brother? The man knew he did not need to listen to the faint cries of slaughter occurring past these privileged walls. He had just witnessed it. Women being burned alive and men being dragged through the streets by men in silver suits, speaking tongues he had never heard before. The streets of Béziers were being washed with blood. and the man did not need to listen to its faint heartbeat inside the thick walls to know this. "You are in the Cathedral Saint-Nazaire, my brother. Do not be alarmed. You are safe." The man scoffed, his ribs squeezing his insides in protest. He let out a groan. "You took a nasty wound out there, in your side. I was able to stitch some of it back together." The monk handed him a cup of wine, which the man took hastily for himself, spilling about half of it on the floor. "I took a pike in my gut," said the man, remembering as he told the story. "Damn soldier must have hit me by mistake when going for a heathen. You cannot keep me safe, monk. No one can keep me safe tonight. It is bedlam in Béziers." "Yes, brother, but I believe you were put in this place for a reason. Who am I to discard God's judgment tonight? He meant for you to find me, and here I am, brother. Here I am to help you." "Help me?" the man said. "Help me with what?" He was becoming furious with the monk, in something he knew nothing about. "How can you help me? People are being slaughtered by thousands outside while you sit in here with your warm fire and shiny altars. For what, monk? Tell me for what?" "For the sacraments, brother. They need to be shown the light of God, or truly we, all of Christendom, will be damned." The man was furiously shaking from anger and from pain. "What gives you the right to call yourself priest?" The monk got up and poured what the man now knew to be soup into a bowl and brought it over to the bed. "I am a priest," he said softly, sitting beside him, "because God spoke to me and asked me to join my fellow men in brotherhood. I have taken oaths of chastity and obedience. These are the ways by which to live, my brother. That is why I call myself a priest. Eat your soup." The man stared down at him angrily, considering starvation as a form of protest, but his body was weak and could not refuse, and remembered that he had not taken the oath of consolamentum, had not yet been baptized in the Cathar church. To starve oneself was a needless means to an unsanctioned end. He took the bowl from the monk and began to eat. Relief flooded his body. The aches in his stomach began to subside. He hoped silently the monk would not be suspicious of him. "Are you from this city?" he asked him finally. From Lyon," said the man, not making eye contact with the monk. He did not want to reveal that he had lived here all his life. The monk might suspect him a heretic. "Lyon," said the monk in astonishment, "but that is so far, brother. How have you found yourself in this city tonight, especially tonight?" "Oh, I came down with the Crusaders as a cook in their regiment," he made up on the spot, "but was almost killed in the commotion tonight." He took a big gulp of his soup in the hopes that the monk might now move on from this topic of discussion. He did not. "That is strange that you would be so close to the city, I should think. Did they need extra men?" The man looked up from his bowl into the monk's eyes, a connection he did not intend to make. "Yes, they needed someone who spoke French. Most of them are Italian and Spanish." The monk smiled. "Ha! Italians and Spanish? Then how can you tell who the heathens are?" He cackled and slapped his knee. The man only smiled. A decent attempt for a man secluded all day in a stony existence. After he had finished laughing at his own joke, the monk said, "Anyway, no need to set you apart from the others. You are doing God's work, brother. Let me dry off your clothes for you by the fire." He took the man's shirt up from the pile at the end of the bed and stretched it out, only to see a crumpled yellow cross fall to the ground by his feet. The monk picked it up, and at this moment the man's heart stopped. He knew he would surely die now. "Go ahead," he snapped. "Turn me in. I'll die a martyr like the rest of my brothers and sisters." He began to get up, forgetting the terrible pain in his stomach and ribs, until the monk put up his hand, his eyes closed. He was weeping silently. The man saw, tears streaming from his pressed lids. He spoke without opening them. "It is not in my hands. It is in God's hands." Finally, the man saw his eyes, so different from before, cold and angry. "You will take your clothing and leave the church from the back entrance. I will not house the heretic. I will give you enough food for 3 days' travel, and a bag to keep it in, but this is all the mercy I can show you." The man nodded and said thank you, took the food and headed towards the door. "Thank you," he repeated. He looked over to the monk, staring into the fire with his hands in his lap. "May God help you, brother," he said, still not looking up.
The man opened the door, rain still pouring down, and slipped out. A cat.